Micah and welcome back to my channel. I am happy to discuss part 2 with you. It is the rest of the fellowship, and this is a video that really is going to take us deeper into understanding the Lord of the Rings, because it's going to use the notes from the Silmarillion, which was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, but it was not published into a book until later on when his son decided to gather up those notes and publish it for us to read. So what I've done is I've gone through the Silmarillion, and I want to bring forward kind of the secrets of the Silmarillion so that when you watch The Lord of the Rings or when you read the story, you'll understand a lot of the background and the history on some of the ideas. Because even though Peter Jackson himself read the Silmarillion, he even wanted to make the Silmarillion a couple different movies. I heard he was trying to do a series, but he did not gain the rights for it from the Tolkien estate. So he knew about the Silmarillion, but he just didn't want to, I guess, say too much. And so what we see in the Lord of the Rings movies is just a little bit of a hint of his knowledge. And so for those of us that have read the Silmarillion, we might be able to see, what is it that the scenes are trying to convey to us about the history of Middle-earth. So with all that said, I hope you got a chance to watch part 1, because I am just going right into part 2, and I've kind of done this chronologically. I went through the movies and I picked out some of the most common questions that are asked about the movies and even about the books themselves. So let's begin. So we're going to jump right into part 2, where we start the journey of the Fellowship. And at this point, we're starting to see Frodo. He gets the weapon Sting, and we see Orcust, and these are these elven weapons that glow blue. But why do they glow blue is actually something that's revealed in the Silmarillion, because it is about the Fëanorian lamps. So this is something interesting, but the Fëanorian lamps are a little bit of a mystery, but it was said to be created by Fëanor, who also created the Silmarils, which were these glowing gems that kind of really absorbed almost like the starlight. So they had this glow to them of like a light blue, a very, very bright star. And they were put into a lantern. They were actually put into like a net, and then they were put into like a white crystal, and it was a blue flame that came out of these Fëanorian lamps. So for a very long time, the elves had this type of crystal, basically, to use in their own technologies that they created in terms of their craftsmanship. So when the Noldor elves, who were very good at making swords and weapons, when they would start to weld the weapons, they also included the crystals in their particles. So this is why you see a lot of the elven weapons. It is said in the story that all elven swords basically glow with these blue crystals to alert the elves when darkness is coming. Get it? Because you have the light of the stars, which is the brightest light in space. And so you have this light that appears coming from the swords to alert them when these dark creatures are around, such as the orcs and other types of Melkor created type of dark creatures. If you don't know who Melkor is, well, he's basically the first energy of the Silmarillion of Discord, and he represents darkness and envy and evil and all of that, and Sauron becomes his greatest student. So what we're seeing in the Third Age is basically Sauron as a Maiar, just following the footsteps of what Melkor tried to do. And that is all in part 1, where I talk about the history. But that is just a little tidbit information. Now, this is something kind of hidden, and you have to look into the Silmarillion, and then you have to look into some of the Lost Tales, and then you could put the puzzle pieces together. But that's what I absolutely believe is happening with these swords. It is these crystals that are embedded in that technology of their craftsmanship of the swords. And it's a wonderful way to have, kind of dual purpose. And so we see that. Now, in the movies, I've seen where people talk about how it seems only Sting actually glows blue. And I think maybe Peter Jackson was doing that so that Frodo's sword stood out, so it didn't all look, like lightsabers everywhere glowing on the film. And so maybe it was just that choice of his. But in the story, all of Elven swords basically that were created in the early age in a hidden Elven realm called Gondolin, it was basically crafted with this blue fire, which is really starlight crystals, basically, that are shimmering. And so we know that Tolkien was very enamored by the stars, and he loved blue light stars best. He references Sirius, he references the Pleiades, and he often says that the stars basically were the light of Valinor and what the elves fell in love with when they first awoken. So the blue light of the stars that we see is basically what the elves have been using for many, many ages. And we see this later on in the dagger of Sting that Frodo gets. Well, handed to him from Bilbo, and Frodo gets. And this is the next part that I was going to talk about with you is with the Fëanorian lamps. One of the interesting things about it is that it cannot be blown out by wind, or it cannot be a light that's snuffed out by water. So there's a little bit more of a magic behind it, but it is truly kind of one of those magical properties that Tolkien is talking about. Really high advanced technology of the elves that you do see a little glimmer of it in the Third Age, even though most of the elves are gone by then when we're watching the movie. So the next part is athelas, and thank you for joining. I'll talk to you at the end. I'm going to go through just some of these questions on the web, and then we could talk a little bit afterwards. But I'm so happy that you're joining me. So it's nice to see you all, Maigavan. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it means well met in Siderian in Tolkien's language for his common modern day Elven language. Basically, it's not Quenya. But let's head on to athelas. So athelas is a very interesting plant that is referenced in Lord of the Rings in Fellowship, and it is also known as king's foil. Well, athelas has a long history, and although you don't hear about it in the Silmarillion, you do hear about it in the tales of Luthien and Beren. And so in that tale that is within the notes of the Silmarillion, to kind of give a background a little bit on the Elven realms, there is a realm called Beleriand. And Beleriand is a very old realm where King Thingol and Melian and Luthien, their daughter, live. It's a very old Elven realm. I would say that he referred to it more like fairy. So there were other creatures in there, not just elves, but it was a really beautiful place, and it was kind of hidden away from other people. And it was just right before you get to Valinor. And so it was a really lovely place. And in Beleriand, there were athelas growing there. And so in the tale of Luthien and Beren, when Beren gets a mortal wound and he gets injured, Luthien is the one to get athelas. Well, she tells the dog Huan. You have to read the story. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's a giant dog that basically helps to save Luthien from Morgoth at this time. And this is where she finds athelas through Huan finding it in the forest and around the lands of Beleriand. And Beren is a man, and she is an elf. And so you have the same story of basically Aragorn and Arwen happening a very long time ago. And so athelas is mentioned in Luthien's story with Beren, but not the Silmarillion. And athelas is a lovely plant that is very similar, I found out, to, I'm going to share a screen here, just a little bit of information for you. I thought this was kind of fun. I have a wonderful book all about the actual flora of Middle-earth. So it's all about the different plants that Tolkien wrote about and shared. This is comfrey, and so this has flowers, but comfrey leaves are also used in rituals, and they have healing properties to them as we use them right now for inflammation and helping the body to just build the immunity. And it's said to have kind of a cooling sensation to it, almost like an evergreen type of fragrance, even a little bit of a taste to it. So it has this really anti-inflammatory properties to it. So this is the plant that he was talking about there. And I'll just leave that screen because it's so beautiful up there. And you do see it in Lord of the Rings where it's talked about where Aragorn said that it was brought by the men of the West to Middle-earth. And this is referring to the Númenóreans. Well, the Númenóreans, they got tons of gifts and goodies from the elves when there was a very strong allegiance between the Númenóreans and the elves at one point. So this is why Aragorn knows about athelas. He has ancient knowledge within him about this plant that really does only grow in the elven realms of Beleriand and some other places, but it was given to the men of the West of Númenóreans by the elves. And this is what it says. These leaves, he said, I have walked far to find, for this plant does not grow in the bare hills, but in the thickets away south of the road. I found it in the dark by the scent of its leaves. He crushed a leaf in his fingers, and it gave out a sweet and pungent fragrance. It is fortunate that I could find it, for it is a healing plant that the men of the West brought to Middle-earth. Athelas, they named it. But now you have a little bit more history in terms of it was actually found by the elves, given from the elves to the men of the West, and that's why Aragorn has this knowledge now. And you can read about it in Luthien and Beren, just a little short, little kind of hint towards it. But that is where you can find athelas appearing. And let's talk about the other thing that athelas does. So athelas is used in the movies, especially when Frodo gets stabbed by the Nargol sword, and that is basically the Wraith King's sword that hits him, and basically is trying to enter into his. It's the Morgul blade. Sorry about that. Nargol, Morgul. I knew it was wrong. So the Morgul blade, it's entering into his heart. And as I said in the part 1, it never really is something that you can take out, unfortunately. It was just forged with too much hate, too much envy, too much jealousy that came from the mind of Sauron when he forged him out. And so the kings, the Wraith Kings, they basically, the king of the Wraiths and the Wraiths, they basically had this type of weapon in order to do damage to those of the enemies of Sauron. So this is why athelas, it has a very healing property to it, and it does slow the blade basically entering into his heart, because these leaves were known to heal the Black Breath. And the Black Breath was basically the curse of the Wraiths. So this is what athelas has been used for, is basically to heal, and it's a very, very strong plant that does help against these dark spirits. of Middle Earth that come from Sauron. So that's why athelas is being used right away by Aragorn, because he remembers about the history of the Wraith and how it's anti-inflammatory towards the black breath of the Wraiths. And then that's why you see that part in the movie, and that's why it's being used. So just a little bit of that information for you. That was interesting. And I would love to talk more about the plants of Middle Earth. So I'll be doing that on another video. I think that'll be a lot of fun, as I want to do some comparisons and show you some similar plants on Earth that Tolkien really loved, and then he included it in his stories. So, you know, he did that a lot, where he took things that he really loved and really appreciated on Earth, and then he just kind of changed and tweaked the name a little bit. So you might feel this sense of familiarity with his writings, because he's basically showing you what he loves of Earth, and then he's changing the name a little bit. Now, the interesting part about that scene when Frodo is basically dying, or he is injured at this point and slowly becoming a wraith, you have Arwen, who comes off of her horse, and he sees her in this light. Well, in the book, it is Glorfindel that he sees. But in the movie, it was a nice choice. It was that little bit of glimmer of Valinor that you see, because what you are seeing is Arwen's spirit form of how she would appear in Valinor. That's why you get the discrepancy between her kind of normal elven casual wear riding a horse, and then what she looks like when Frodo sees her, because he has entered into this spirit realm where he's like on the astral plane a little bit, like basically he's part of that void where Sauron can see him and interact with him. And so he is basically entering into the spirit realm because the wraiths stabbed him with the Morgul blade, and now he sees Arwen as her true form. This is her spirit form as the even star of her people, and he sees this of what she would appear like in Valinor. So it was just a little hint, just a little glimmer of just a little bit of that extra place that Tolkien hinted at what Valinor is. Valinor is the unlimited realm of high goodness, high magic, everything that basically the elves bring to Middle Earth, you know, through teaching. But in Valinor, it is far more powerful because you have the Valar living there. You have the powers of Middle Earth. So I just thought I would show you that. Now, when you watch the movie, you'll understand why she looks so different to Frodo. He is seeing her in her Valinor form. The next part about Arwen I thought would be interesting to talk about is Arwen's even star. So there is actually no even star in the way that Peter Jackson showed it in the movies, although I must say it was a beautiful, lovely design, and I really love it. So I'm not mad at it at all. But Arwen's even star is really just a star necklace that she gives away to Frodo in The Return of the King. So sorry if I let that slip out. Hopefully you read it. She gives that star necklace to Frodo, passes it on so that he may find rest. I will talk about that later, though, in Return of the King. I'll actually read that little part because it's really beautiful. But what I wanted to talk to you about was the elessar. So the elessar does appear in the Silmarillion. It is the gift of Aragorn. Well, Arwen had it for Aragorn. She had it in Lorien, and it was given to Galadriel to watch. And then it was this beautiful green stone that was talked about in the Silmarillion because Olorian, who is Gandalf, but he went by a name Olorian, because if you did not see part 1, Olorian was basically his first name when he was in Valinor and when he was studying with the Valar. He's a Maiar, so he's a lesser spirit, lesser power powerful spirit than the Valar, but he was a guardian of Middle-earth. So he studied with Nienna. And during that time, he was passed down elessar, which is this green stone that it's green as the leaves, but it had the light of the sun trapped within it. And it granted powerful healing to its wearer. And looking through the green stone, you saw anything old and withered as new and fresh and alive again. It was connected to Yavanna, one of the Valar, Valier, a female version of the Valar. And she was basically the power of Middle-earth of nature. She was like your mother nature goddess, basically. And she was in charge of all the trees and the animals and the plants. So, of course, it was this, the heart of the forest, a beautiful green. And it was this gem, elessar, that was given to Aragorn to help him maintain, basically, himself. It gave him the healing properties in him, on his body when he wore it, so that he would not wither, get old. And basically this was the gift of immortality. And it was given to Elorion, as I said. Gandalf first had it given to him, and then he gave it to Galadriel, and he said, give it to the one called elessar as well, which means new hope. Elessar is the stone of Erendiel. It is basically the elf stone, and there was this prophecy or this idea that they were one day going to have this great new beginning of Middle-earth. There was going to come a man that was going to become a king to unite all the kingdoms together in peace. And so this is what Gandalf knew when his name was Elorion back in Valinor. So it is a little different than the movie, but a similar idea in terms of immortality and helping Aragorn live for a long time, basically. So that was just a little bit of a difference there, but I just wanted to give you the background because that's what appears in the Silmarillion there. The next thing that appears is Mithril. So in the movies, you get just a little bit of a hint of what Mithril means. It is a metal that's present in Middle-earth that's like silver, but it's stronger than steel. So maybe, and it's lighter, so maybe like titanium, maybe. I'm not sure if I know my metals, but it's supposed to be stronger than steel, but it does glitter and it has a shininess of silver. And myth is gray in the Elven tongue, and rill is glitter. And there was this kind of history of Mithril. It's been used a lot throughout the ages in terms of how the elves used it in their own realms. It is used in a way that they create like an alloy, and it was created by a Noldar of Eregion, where it's this elven land, and this Noldar elves basically created this silver inlay using an alloy of Mithril to decorate the elven realms in the doorways, in gateways, just kind of this silver inlay that you might see as a decoration. But it had a very special property. It only glowed in the moonlight and in the starlight. So that is why you see it in the Gate of Moria. You see it's basically outlining the runes and the elvish Tengwar. So you see that, and it's only going to glow in the moonlight or in the starlight. So I thought that was really neat, because you do get a little bit more history about Mithril that you really don't see in the movies or really in the book of Lord of the Rings either. You got to go into the way history to understand what was Tolkien saying about Mithril. Why was it such a strong metal that would protect him? It is like dragon scales. It's not particularly dragon scales, but it's supposed to be a type of silver, a metal. And it was even used in the Silmarillion to create Erendiel's ship. So the sides of it, so they didn't always use wood, the elves. They actually did use the type of metal, but it was lighter than metal. So, you know, it was better probably than steel. And this ship, the Vingalote, is mentioned in the Silmarillion. It was made of Mithril and Elven glass. So they actually used glass as material, this type of lighter steel. And then they had, you know, their wood sometimes, like the Lorien ships, the Lothorian ships. When he sailed the sky carrying a Silmaril, which is a type of star gem, basically, he put it on the bow of his ship, and that sailed across the sky, and it's supposed to just represent the morning star. And it's up there now forever, just kind of lighting the way for travelers. And later on, Galadriel, she filled a vial of the star, the morning star. Can I say the even star? The morning star, reflecting into some water. She filled her vial. And so that is the light of Erendiel. It is the light of the star of Erendiel. And this is what she gives to Frodo as a gift to ward off Ungoliant and some other dark creatures. Once again, starlight is always referenced as something that has the power to banish all darkness, which is very true, because if you think about it, you have dark space, like a vacuum, and then you have bright light. And so this is what I guess Tolkien was symbolizing, that the stars were the brightest aspects of a dark sky. And so it could really banish any darkness. And the other question sometimes people ask is about the Sword of Narsil. So the Sword of Narsil, it means in Quenya, a red and white flame. So once again, maybe a reference to a red star. And this is made by Telkar of Novgorod, which is an ancient dwarf race of Nagrim. So this is an ancient race that kind of is part of the Durin people and the elves of Moria, but a lot older. And this, I wanted to read a part because this was really nicely said here, and it will give you some history on Narsil, because people don't really get history in the movie at all. You know, you just see this broken sword, and it's just interesting to see more, you know, what is this sword? How did it get broken? So it says this. Okay. So then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron, and they laid siege to it for 7 years and suffered grievous loss by fire and by the darts and bolts of the enemy. And Sauron sent many sorties against them. There in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain, and many others. But at the last, the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and the sword of Elendil broke. And he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain. And the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years. So that's the whole thing about the ring, as I was talking about in part 1. The whole idea is that if Sauron got that ring of power that Frodo was carrying, he would then be able to take actual form once again, and they really wanted him to not do that. That's why he was only an eye in the movie, sitting at the top of the tower, basically looking out from the astral field, spirit realm, the void, you know, where the bad spirits go, where they're not invited to Valinor. They're not in the afterlife. They're basically stuck in kind of a middle ground of a spiritual astral plane where they have to look out and watch all life before them, but yet they can't experience it. So it makes their hate grow even more. So Morgoth was in the void for a while. Sauron's now in the void. And so this is what happens. They get trapped in this place of spiritual darkness. And it just makes them basically their hate grow further and further. And they can plot revenge. And as we see in the movie, that's definitely what happened, and in the books. So I'll keep going here. So this part here is about the prophecy of Narsil. So once we have Narsil broken, now Elrond has a prophecy. Thus Narsil came in due time to the hand of Valandil, Isildur's heir, in Imladris, but the blade was broken, and its light was extinguished, and it was not forged anew. And Imladris is another name for Rivendell. And Master Elrond foretold that this would not be done until the ruling ring should be found again, and Sauron should return. But the hope of elves and men was that these things might never come to pass. So that's why you see Narsil being kept in Rivendell, away from Sauron, away from anything else that can, take that sword away, because that is a sword that was strong enough, because it was made by Telkar, who was known as the strongest dwarven metalsmith at the time. And there was a certain type of power to it because it had this red and white flame. And so it was extremely powerful, with a spiritual fire basically within this sword. I would even go further to say it had the imperishable flame part of that sword. And the imperishable flame is talked about in the Silmarillion, that the imperishable flame is something that only belonged to the mind that created the entire universe, Eru Iluvatar. So this is a piece of him, a consciousness, a spark of consciousness that is so powerful, it can basically do anything. And of course, Melkor, Sauron, and all the other dark, spirits, they always want to get to that imperishable flame, but only it remains in the mind of Eru Iluvatar, and no one else can get it. What I take from that was that Tolkien was talking about the spark of consciousness that creates life, that animates life, that gives us our actual consciousness. Even science today, scientists still don't understand consciousness. So it is, in this way, a very poetic expression of what, really gives us our awareness. And it is only with Eru. No one else has it. Valar, nothing. But a lot of the darker characters wanted to capture it for themselves, like Melkor. And I say darker in the idea that they just were outside of the light of Eru because they chose to be. So that was the information for Narsil. So now you know. And just so you know who Isildur is, because the movie doesn't really tell it. And it almost seems like Isildur was just a few ancestors back from Aragorn, but you actually learned that he was the 39th away from Aragorn. So Aragorn is the 39th heir of Isildur. So Aragorn will be the 40th number of the kings of Númenorian who are going to become king of Gondor once again. And on that note, let's talk about Gondor, because in the Fellowship, you see the statues there, and they are there because it is the statues of Argonath, and this is basically welcoming anybody through the river of Anduin, which is by Rivendell, and Gondor means land of stone. A little interesting information I learned: the statues are different in the book and in the movie. So in the movie, they are Isildur and Elendil. So those are the two figures that you see standing there. And I think one of them is holding Narsil in their hand. And in the book, it's Isildur and Anarion, his brother, which are also kings of Gondor. So you see a little bit of a discrepancy there between the book and the movie. And there's also an axe being held in the book. You don't see that. You only see Narsil in the movie. But here's how Gondor started. So you have all the information you need on, who is Aragorn and, what is Gondor. Well, Isildur and Anarion were borne away southwards, and at the last they brought their ships up the great river Anduin that flows out of Rovanion into the western sea and the bay of Belfalis, and they established a realm in those lands that were after called Gondor, whereas the northern kingdom was named Arnor. Long before, in the days of their power, the mariners of Numenor had established a haven and strong places about the mouths of Anduin, in despite of Sauron in the Black Land that lay nigh upon the east. In the later days to this haven came only the faithful of Numenor, and many therefore of the folk of the coastlands in that region were in whole or in part akin to the elf friends and the people of Elendil, and they welcomed his sons. The chief city of the southern realm was Osgiliath, through the mist of which the great river flowed, and the Numenorians built there a great bridge, upon which there were towers and houses of stone, wonderful to behold, and tall ships came up out of the sea to the quays of the city. Other strong places they built also upon either hand, minus Ithil, the tower of the rising moon, eastward upon a shoulder of the mountains of shadow as a threat to Mordor, and to the westward minus Anor, the tower of the setting sun, at the feet of Mount Mindolian, as a shield against the wild men of the dales. In Minas Ithil was the house of Isildur, and in Minas Anor the house of Anarion. But they shared the realm between them, and their thrones were set side by side in the great hall of Osgiliath. These were the chief dwellings of the Numenorians in Gondor, but other works marvelous and strong they built in the land in the days of their power, at the Argonath and at Argilrond, at the Airrock, and in the circle of Angranos, which men called Isengard. They made the pinnacle of Orthanc of unbreakable stone, and many treasures and great heirlooms of virtue and wonder, the exiles, the elves, the Noldor elves that were exiled from Valinor, had brought from Numenor, and of these the most renowned were the 7 stones and the white tree. The white tree was grown from the fruit of Nimloth the fair, that stood in the courts of the king at Armelois in Numenor, ere Sauron burned it. And Nimloth was in its turn descended from the tree of Tirion, that was an image of the eldest of trees, white Telperion, which Yavanna caused to grow in the land of the Valar. The tree memorial of the Eldar and the light of Valinor was planted in Minas Ithil, before the house of Isildur, since he it was that had saved the fruit from destruction, but the stones were divided. And then it talks about where the stones went to. And so Arathorn was Aragorn's father, and Arathorn comes from the line of Isildur, and Isildur is connected to Gondor, was one of the rulers of that, the southern part, and then you had his brother on the other side, and then that's where you have the symbolism of the moon and the sun. And I always thought it was interesting because we know that the elves were connected more to the moon in Tolkien's mind, and they awoke during the moonlight and the starlight, and you had the men awaken during the sun, when the sun was rising in the Silmarillion, when they were first born on Middle Earth. So you have an interesting connection with Isildur connected to the moon, and then his heir basically passing down that connection, and then he marries an elven princess who is related to, they have a very similar ancestral line. And in fact, if you go into a little bit more about Numenor, that is a land, it's basically an island where you had many of the Eldar mingling with the human men and women. And at one point, there were elf-human relationships, and at some point, both the kings and the lords of the elves thought that maybe we should maybe divide a little bit, in terms of that there was no order, and they were starting to just kind of mingle too much. So this is why you see still an allegiance of the men and the elves, but eventually there is a parting of the ways. But there is a tiny bit of elven bloodline because of this ancient mingling in Numenor. And then you have Aragorn, who has the ancestral line of Luthien and Elrond. And basically he's many times removed from Arwen, but he is still connected to her through this line of elven lineage. And so this is why you see a little bit of a strength to Aragorn that surpasses maybe the other human men. And I think what Tolkien was trying to show was that he was the old king of Gondor, Numenor, and this was a place where the elves came to teach the elven light to the humans. So this was kind of that metaphor, and that's why Aragorn is such a stand-up man, because he comes from this line of really proud ancient humans that had a strong allegiance with the elves and learned many crafts and many art, and they were passed down basically many of the things that the elves knew. And so they even had a house of healing in Gondor where they learned the craft of elven healing with herbs. So this is why you see athelas being used a lot in the house of healing and other types of herbal remedies as well. So I thought that would be interesting to talk about. Let's go to just the last part here. Let's talk about, because now we're in Moria, just two things I wanted to talk about. The sea creature the gate of Moria had, which is called the Watcher in the Water. If you ever want to look up it in the books, that's how Tolkien describes it. Doesn't have a name, just Watcher in the Water. And then you have the Belrog, which is the fire demon. Well, both of these beings basically were created before a long time ago, basically when Middle Earth was basically being formed. They are from the music of Discord, and they are Maiar spirits and energies that started to side with Discord and follow that music. And so they side with Sauron. So this is why you see the sea creature almost being alerted when the fellowship comes to the door. It was not just there on coincidence. It definitely arose from the depths. It was said to be there when there was a damming of the river Sirion. And that's when this creature started living in this pool. And then that's what happened. It was living there for many ages. And you get a little bit of a kind of a hint towards it in the movie when it's showing, and in the book, it's showing them looking at the pages of the dwarf kings that they go into Moria and they see that the dwarves were killed by goblins. Well, in the pages, it was talking about how the Watcher in the Water got Owen. And then that's when you see it, kind of cut off in the writing. So the Watcher in the Water came and basically came after the dwarves in Moria. So the Watcher has always been kind of watching, I guess, waiting for the fellowship to come. It is under the allegiance of Sauron. And it is this just giant tentacled, kind of like an octopus, but it's a lot more slimier. It's a lot more big and grotesque. And it's said to have a little bit more of a different face than an octopus does. So Tolkien was not just trying to insult octopi on our Earth, but he was actually just kind of using the idea of the Kraken, which is an ancient tale of a sea monster in many different myths and legends. So that's why you see that kind of just thrown in there. It's just a little bit of that hint of the history with Morgoth, creating and corrupting these creatures of Middle Earth and creating these really dark, twisted, and hateful creatures that just are after killing and working in service to Sauron. So that's why he's there. The Balrog is a Maiar. I talked a little bit about this in part 1, and this is the last question I'm going through here. But I'll just give you a little bit more information, because Gandalf says when he's walking through, and this also refers to the Watcher in the water, he also says there are older, fouler things than orcs that dwell in deep places of the world. So he kind of just cautioning them that there is other things to be worried about than just orcs and goblins. And then that's when we see the Watcher in the water. But he's also referring to the fire demon, a Balrog, and it has a longer name, a flame. It's called the Flame of Udun. And this is when Gandalf says, I am the servant of the secret fire, the welder of the flame of Anor. Do not come here, Flame of Udun. So there is kind of this addressing this fire Balrog, this demon. It's basically this Maiar, this very powerful energy, spirit, elemental, basically a fire elemental that had wings of fire. People say, was it actual physical, like wings, or was it just like an aura of fire? I would say that Tolkien wrote it was flames, wings of flame. So not so much what we might think of bird wings or other types of wings, maybe bat wings, but definitely just fire. I mean, he's just purely an elemental of fire. And so the Flame of Udun is fire without light of the sun. Because the Flame of Anor, which is what Gandalf says, I'm the servant, I am the wielder of the Flame of Anor, and Anor means the flame of the sun. So he's right there comparing and contrasting, like, yes, you're a fire demon, but I wield the flame and the power of the sun. So to Tolkien, light without spiritual goodness, some kind of spiritual substance, is really not powerful at all. It is just kind of a light show in a way. And so that's what Gandalf was saying, is that I have the power of the sun. You are the flame of darkness, which is a very deep concept, because yes, we think of fire as also the sun, the sun, a big ball of fire, but there's a difference there. And Tolkien is letting us know about that. So that is just kind of the interesting information that you get from the Silmarillion, just a little bit more. It does talk more about Maiars and what they are in terms of how they either side with Sauron or they side with the other Valar, and of course Eru Ilúvatar, which means that they work, towards the light and being in harmony with other beings and cooperating and trying to collaborate and co-create. Whereas you have the other servants, the other Maiars who are servants of Sauron, that are actually just on Middle Earth to cause the discord, just to cause the problems and the death and destruction. There is a symbolism of nature here. We know that in fairy, the idea of dark fairies, light fairies, what Tolkien was saying is that nature itself has aspects of both light and dark. So we have the destructive parts of nature, which we know, but it's needed still. Although it causes grief, it's suffering. There's a lot of horrible things that happen with forest fires and things like that. There still is healing that comes afterwards. So the lighter side of nature is healing and rebirth, all of that. So that's why Tolkien was showing these different energies. He was very nature connected as a soul. And so if you look deep in his writings, you will see always this reference between the yin and the yang of nature itself. And so I really loved, seeing that and learning that deeper about what does Gandalf and the Balrog really mean and symbolize in both the movie and the book. He's showing that aspect of both destructive and both the healing, the positive aspects of nature. And we see that, and it's just a wonderful way of just understanding that both have to exist. We may not like both because, well, we might not like one of them because it causes destruction and decay and a lot of problems. And, it can cause a lot of grief and suffering, but it is needed. So if we can hold fast and get through those times, we will reach healing and rebirth. And we see that in a larger picture about, the whole story of Lord of the Rings and what it means, being in darkness and having darkness spread for a while by Sauron, but then afterwards there's so much rebirth and rejoicing. So I decided I'm going to do an entire video just dedicated to Galadriel because there is so much about her in the Silmarillion. I really want to focus on her. And I know that she gives a lot of gifts in the fellowships. I want to talk about those gifts. I want to show you where they appear in the Silmarillion and give you those secrets and things to kind of look for on your own when you want to. So I guess that's it. If you have any questions, I'm hoping that this doesn't take too long tonight. I'm a little tired, but I will definitely ask any questions that if any of you have. Otherwise, I think that you said the Silmarillion is your favorite book, Sky? I think so too. It's really, truly beautiful. It is just so vast. So I tried to do this in one video and I was like, this video would be way too long. I had to put it into parts. So that's why you're seeing, part 1, part 2, and now I'll move on to the next book and I'll probably have to split it up into parts. I have to see, all the things that connects to the Silmarillion and how many parts does it really need. But Nurin, the hairs she gave to Gimli are really special. Yeah. And I will talk about that. I will. I'm going to just dedicate an entire video to Galadriel. And how about I do that next before moving on to the 2 towers so that we have just all of Galadriel's information, the gifts she gave, where did she come from? I'm going to talk about her fountain. I'm going to talk about everything. I'm going to talk about her being a sea witch. Well, the other part of her. So I'm happy to do that. So I'll do that maybe next week, if that is a good time for you all. So I will be doing that. And Esley, Spellbound, the 7s are gripping. He used 7 a lot in his story. There's 7 sons of Feanor. There were 7 dwarf kings. There were 7 days, 7. There's just always 7. And it is a sacred number in terms of being used, throughout the ages, talked about, and even our idea of Genesis, So I think that he held on to 7, 7 chakras, 7 days of creation, right? And so I think that's why Tolkien really loved the number 7. It's fun, actually. Maybe I'll do that one day. I'll go through, the Silmarillion and count how many references to 7 there are. I think that would be interesting to see. And we'll talk about what 7 means in terms of our own history in the world and where we see it, because I think that it really is a powerful number. In tarot, it is one of the magical numbers. I mean, if you get 7, it means that you're basically entering into your magical phase of being the magician. So I think that Tolkien was aware of that in some way. So I really love that. And the musical scales, that's right. Yeah, that's right. 7 notes. And the 8th is the overtone. So yes, definitely. We see it everywhere. 7 days of the week, 7 days of the week, yeah. So, and the 7 days of the week comes from Greek gods, the Roman and the Greek gods. That's why we named our days. So yeah, we'll talk more about 7 and its significance in Lord of the Rings. I think that would be fun to do. Thank you all for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you all for the next video on Galadriel. And have fun pulling out some of the Silmarillion secrets in Lord of the Rings when you watch it next. Everyone, take care. I'll see you soon, okay? Namarie.